The hall was built to intimidate, wide enough to swallow sound, and tall enough to remind every soldier inside how small they were beneath the weight of command. Nearly 1,000 uniforms filled the space, boots aligned, backs straight, eyes forward, discipline breathing in unison when her name echoed through the speakers and cut the air like a blade. She stepped forward without hesitation, calm, controlled, trained for pressure far worse than this. Yet she felt every eye settle on her, as if the room itself was judging her worth. The Admiral stood above her on the platform, decorated, polished, powerful, a man who believed authority was proven by fear. His voice carried easily, sharp with accusation, words like insubordination and disobedience thrown casually, as if they were already facts. She opened her mouth to speak, not to argue, but to clarify, to follow procedure, but he never allowed it. His hand moved fast, too fast for anyone to stop. The sound of impact cracked through the silence. 1,000 soldiers watched her take the hit, watched her head turn slightly, watched her absorb it without falling. Time stretched. No gasps, no shouts, just a heavy, stunned stillness. She straightened slowly, her face unreadable. No tears, no anger, only restraint so precise it unsettled the room. Soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down, others stared in disbelief, because something was wrong, not with her, but with the moment itself. She did not react like someone defeated. She reacted like someone waiting. The Admiral mistook her silence for submission and continued, unaware that the strike had crossed lines written in laws older than his command. Unseen systems were already responding, silent checks unfolding beyond the hall. She remained at attention, eyes steady, breathing even, letting the weight of his mistakes settle fully, because she knew what came next would not require her to raise a hand, only to stand and let truth arrive on its own terms. The silence that followed did not break. It expanded, stretching across the hall and pressing against every soldier who stood frozen in place. No orders were given, no dismissals sounded, yet no one moved. Her stillness became the center of the room, a quiet gravity that pulled attention away from the platform and onto her presence. She stood exactly as she had been trained, spine straight, hands relaxed, eyes forward. Not in defiance, but in discipline. Whispers did not rise. They crawled. Subtle glances passed between officers. A tightening of jaws, a shift of weight. The kind of reactions that only happen when something feels wrong, but no one yet understands why. Senior personnel began noticing details they should have seen earlier. The precision of her uniform, the absence of decorative rank, yet the presence of restricted insignia. The way she had stepped forward without fear, without hesitation, as if she had expected this moment long before it arrived. The Admiral continued to speak, but his words no longer carried the same authority. His voice echoed, yet failed to command, because the room was listening to something else now. An unspoken awareness that the event unfolding was no longer under his control. She did not look at him again, her gaze fixed ahead, steady and unyielding, as if she were counting down something only she could hear, behind sealed doors and encrypted channels. Systems awakened, background processes began, confirming identities and timelines. Logs were accessed, that rarely saw daylight. Names tied to operations never mentioned in briefings were cross-checked. Clearance levels escalated without announcement, all of it happening silently, while 1,000 soldiers stood unaware they were witnessing the beginning of an irreversible correction. The air changed. Not louder, not sharper, but heavier. A collective instinct rippling through trained minds that understood consequences. She remained silent through it all, because she knew that when authority breaks the rules publicly, the response must be equally public, equally undeniable, and the Admiral still did not realize that the silence was not protecting him. It was preparing to expose him. The first screen activated without warning, a soft tone barely audible beneath the tension, then another, and another, until the walls themselves seemed to awaken. Classified seals filled the displays, symbols most soldiers had only seen in training simulations. The kind that meant no one in the room was supposed to be watching. A collective breath was held as her identification appeared. Not a name alone, but layers of designation unfolding slowly, deliberately. As if the system itself demanded respect, her service record began to scroll. Missions listed without locations. Operations marked complete with casualty figures that made experienced officers stiffen. Entire conflicts reduced to brief summaries that hinted at outcomes changed by a single unseen unit, by a single operator. Murmurs threatened to rise, but discipline held them down. Everyone sensed they were witnessing something beyond rumor, beyond myth, the proof of a shadow structure operating alongside the visible chain of command. The Admiral turned confusion, replacing certainty, his posture tightening as recognition crept in too late. An emblem appeared beside her profile, restricted, protected, unmistakable. One that outranked authority not by title, but by mandate. The strike he had delivered replayed on a small inset feed, time-stamped, verified, and categorized, not as misconduct, but as a breach of international military accord. She finally moved. Just enough to shift her weight, her voice still silent, her presence speaking instead. The hall no longer belonged to the Admiral. It belonged to the truth unfolding in cold procedural clarity, because in that moment every soldier understood the reality. She had never been on trial, she had been the measure, and the system had just finished confirming. 8 orders arrived without voices, without ceremony, transmitted through channels that did not ask for acknowledgement. The Admiral felt it before he understood it. His personal security detail stiffened, hands moving not toward weapons, but toward restraint. The platform that had elevated him moments earlier now felt exposed. Stripped of authority by invisible command, the soldiers, standing in formation, realized then that they were no longer spectators. They were witnesses by design. The silence had not been fear. It had been compliance with protocol. Every rank present was required to see what happens when power violates its own laws. The Admiral attempted to speak, to reassert control, but his words fell into the air, unfinished. Overridden by systems that did not negotiate, she turned at last. Not with anger, not with triumph, but with precision. Her gaze settled on the Admiral with calm professional detachment, and when she spoke, her voice was level and measured. Each sentence structured for record, not revenge. She stated facts, timestamps, violations. Nothing more, nothing less. The kind of language that ends careers without ever raising volume. Security stepped in smoothly, efficiently, escorting the Admiral away as if he were already history. The hall remained silent, not in shock now, but in understanding. A shift had occurred. Authority had not changed hands loudly, it had corrected itself. She faced the soldiers again, offering no speech, no explanation, because none was required. The lesson had already been delivered. Discipline was not obedience to rank, it was obedience to law. And as she stepped back into formation, the weight in the room lifted slightly, replaced by a quiet respect that did not need applause to exist. Night settled over the base with an unfamiliar calm, the kind that follows correction rather than chaos. Corridors once ruled by reputation now felt neutral, balanced. As systems adjusted and authority realigned itself without ceremony, she moved through the facility quietly, boots echoing softly against polished floors. Soldiers stepped aside instinctively, not out of fear but recognition. They understood now that what they had witnessed was not punishment, but preservation. The Admiral was gone, removed with efficiency that left no room for spectacle. His name already fading from command lists and access panels. Not erased in anger, but archived as a lesson. His regret had come too late, born not from conscience, but from realization. He had struck someone, protected not by power, but by principle. And principle does not forgive ignorance. She did not linger on the outcome. She never had. Her role was never to enjoy endings, only to ensure they arrived correctly. In the quiet of the command wing, she submitted final confirmations. Each action closing a loop opened hours earlier. The system responded with acknowledgement and nothing more. Because for those who worked in its deepest layers, success was silences. She returned to her quarters. The base continued operating. Drills resumed, lights dimmed, order restored. Yet something fundamental had shifted. The soldiers would remember this moment not as a scandal, but as clarity. They had learned that restraint could be stronger than force, that patience could dismantle abuse more completely than retaliation. She paused once before the doors closed, not to look back, but to breathe, steady and controlled as always, knowing tomorrow would bring another assignment, another test of quiet resolve. Because some soldiers are not meant to be symbols or legends. They exist to ensure the system works when it matters most. And tonight it had worked exactly as intended.